Hi, I'm Mark Mynett, and I'm here to discuss the Heaviness in Metal Music production project, which I've been running along with my project partner, Jan Herbst. And we're looking at my mix of In Solitude today, which has been an interesting one, as I was involved in the recording of the drums and reamping the guitars and bass. And I'm here with John Brown today.
Hello, mate.
To interview me about my mix process and some of the decisions that I made to fulfill the blueprint that I had for this production. Let's have a look.
All right, so the first thing I wanted to ask you, Mark, is earlier in a previous take of the first section that you went through 5 times, you like a clean mix. You want to hear everything. You want everything to be audible, but at the same time, you want it to sound like a tank. So what kind of challenges do you face in a mix to be able to achieve the clarity, but also the bigness?
Yeah, and that comes down to this sort of subjective term, cohesion.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people who listen to metal music have a very good understanding of how bands sound live.
Yeah.
And that clear understanding of how drums sound in a room when you're in there with the drummer, or like I say, a band live. And they have a kind of like an innate understanding of how it sounds fake or it doesn't sound natural. And it's back to this term cohesion, where it sounds like they're parts of a unified whole, and making that unified whole so they're not overly separated and they all sort of like share. It's almost like individual fingers. They're not much use on their own, but you put them together and you've got a fist, and all of those fingers and the thumb work together as a fist.
Yeah.
And as Buster Overhome was saying, you want a fist in your ear with that sonic impact.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of not getting clarity. And as, again, Colin Richardson says, with metal music, you're always looking for clarity.
Yeah.
If you can't hear the note definition, your riffs no longer make sense. If you've got a complex drum fill and you can't hear, a small little splash cymbal between the second and third tom on a fast 30 seconds roll, that drum fill no longer makes sense.
Yeah.
So the faster and the more complicated the music, particularly as you go, as you will well know, towards math metal and progressive metal, the more complicated the message is and the greater the emphasis on clarity.
Yeah.
Whereas with slower music that's less complicated, like, for example, My Dying Bride, whose last couple of albums I've done, clarity's not as important. You can go with a greater sense of sonic weight and cohesion because it's an easier message to understand.
Okay, yeah. So with this mix, it's got sort of everything that you just mentioned in this one mix. So if we take a look, what did you do overall in order to get the sections that needed the clarity to have the clarity, and the sections that needed the weight? How did you get the weight on those?
Interestingly, I kind of took Fredrik Nordstrom's approach here. If I remember rightly, Fredrik didn't use any automation on his mix whatsoever. He just worked on sounds that would work across it.
Okay.
And so I think there's a little bit of automation on some of the distorted elements of the bass, and there's some automation with reverb times, but it's not like I've gone for a drastically different guitar sound throughout, as one example. What I'll often do with guitars is I'll try and make the chorus pop, and this is where your fireworks need to go off.
Yeah.
And so I'll sometimes add an additional central rhythm thickener.
Okay, yeah.
Or if it's quad track guitars, I'll subtly bring up 2 of them in the chorus and make other moves, like, you'll change the cymbals levels for the chorus and automation moves like that. But as far as this mix, I didn't actually go through any significant automation between the sections. I just tried to make the guitar sound work so that when it was the low chugs, it worked there, and went with some dynamic processing, like multi-band compression to, tighten up those chugs. And then obviously when Richard Shaw, the guitarist on this project, was tremolo picking, the multi-band compression is not going to kick in, and hopefully you've got a tonal attribute to the tremolo picking that works as well as the chugs. So
there's literally minimal automation between the sections of fast and slow.
Yeah.
Even on the drums.
Yeah, I think there's reverb time. I think I've actually used 3 different reverbs here.
Should we take a look?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've got more and more, let's have a look at the drums here.
You're going to have to move that to the other screen.
Yeah, good shout. So what we've got here, what you'll see is that I've kind of got into this mixing methodology of using 3 different drum reverbs usually. I've actually only gone for 2 on this mix. I've gone for a plate, and I've gone for probably large wood room with LX480. What I usually do with mixes these days is I go with a plate, a room. LX480 large wood room is one of my favourites, stolen from Mike Exeter, need to quote your sources. And then I go for like a hall reverb, like just a long sustain of reverb. And I think this surprises a lot of people, is that when you've got this, it's not like it's reverb, it's just providing this bed of reverb that just washes throughout, not a particularly significant mix level, and I've moved more towards that. I previously interviewed Nick Raskulinecz, and I mean, he's absolutely amazing with his reverbs. I think he had 6 to 7 different reverbs on the Alice in Chains album, Blue Gives Way to Black, and he subtly changes the reverbs between the verse sections and the chorus sections. Although I didn't do that on this song, what I do is start with 3 different reverbs, and then you're just listening to how they work with the track. And then what it appears I've done here is I've actually discounted the very long reverb, and it appears not to have worked as much for this mix, because it has got the slower sections, but it's never really slow.
Yeah, never super slow.
Yeah, so I've just gone with a plate, and I've gone with the LX480 large wood room, and let's just see if there's any automation on that. I mean, I think there'll be automation with the big hits, but yeah, you can see here I've got a reverb sum, and you can see that I've been pushing for some big hits here. There's some little pulls and some little pushes where there's some big hits, but the plate reverb, I don't think there's any automation on that whatsoever. Oh no, there is. So I've got the 7th Heaven Professional. I've changed the decay time. So yeah, you can see what I've done here.
Hardly anything.
Hardly anything. I've just gone from a decay time of 1.45 on this plate. Then in the slower section, I'm just going up to like 1.8, and then there's just, just jumps even higher there just for some of the big hits. And then on the large wood room, again, there's a reverb time and a pre-delay setting. Again, I'm jumping up to 3.35.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have actually changed the decay times quite a lot there, and I've also, let me see, probably gone for some pre-delay. Yeah, just a little bit of pre-delay at the beginning, just to really make it more like a special effect on certain hits.
Exactly. And these reverbs, is it something that's across the entire mix, or is it predominantly for drums?
No, just for drums. So I've got completely separate reverbs, and you might be surprised at the effects change later on. I've got 2. Is it worth chatting about this now, or should we come back to this later on? Up to you.
We can come back to this later. Let's see how it sounds on the drums between the 2 reverbs. I think, and then you had something going on with the guitars, I guess, and that's what that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is from, let's play this from the beginning. No, so let's go in for the verse here. Can hear there immediately. Do you know what? Your question about have I done much between the different sections, I'm gonna revisit my answer here. You can clearly hear that one of the drum samples, this John Tempesta sample that I've got here, comes back in volume. It's got a lot of sustain, it's got a lot of bark and a lot of ring, and you can hear that sample, it's not clear in the mix itself, but I can actually see the automation move that I've carried out here to tighten up for these blast beats.
Yeah.
You've got a blast beat and it sounds like a Def Leppard snare, and it's going to sound like a mess. It's just going to be an absolute mush.
Yeah.
So I've obviously tightened this up here, and you can hear it going across that section. Actually, looking at the automation now, I actually have done more automation than I remembered.
That's completely fine. We often forget the little moves that we make, don't we? Yeah. But one thing that did stand out to me there was the amount of transient that came out on the kick and snare immediately.
Yeah.
Can I compare that to see what it's like on the sort of slower sections? Because obviously you said you automated the snare in for that.
Absolutely. So this is one of the slower sections.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you can hear there's definitely a transient difference, but the actual tone of the drum is still very similar.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're just trying to bring out that extra bit of attack, the punch to the face, the tank to the face, just for those faster sections.
Absolutely. We were chatting earlier just before we started filming about Andy Wallace.
Yeah.
And of course, if anybody is the absolute all-time master of automation, it's Andy Wallace.
It is.
He goes through his mixes and super patient and goes through just a little bit, and you wouldn't listen to it and go, wow, there's a change there, but it provides a dynamic journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's really important to give the listener that dynamic journey and optimize sections and make the fireworks go off in the right place and pull things back when you need to.
Yeah.
And there's so many subtle, automation moves that I've learned from Andy Wallace, like pushing the first kick drum of the chorus and cymbal hits and all these kind of things, making things a little bit brighter for the choruses and increasing the reverbs potentially. Yeah,
exactly. So when it came to the drums, were there any challenges that you faced other than trying to get those big sections to come out, with the transient hits against the fast bits versus the slow bits? You said you've done the automation, but there's still not really a huge amount of change between the fast sections. I don't see any automation for extra rooms, for example, or adding mics.
No, it is. I would like to think it would be the kind of automation moves that you wouldn't pick up on if you hear the mix. Like it just goes from one section to the other and you don't hear anything.
Yeah.
And the same with Andy Wallace's moves. You want to kind of like smuggle these across to the listener without it being overtly obvious. So no, I think you're right. I think there's been a case of that there's just a little bit of automation on this particular snare sample that you can see here. I've actually only used 2 snare samples. I'll often use a lot more than that.
So are you stacking those snare samples on top of the real snare?
Yeah.
Can we cycle through those to see what they individually sound like as well?
The samples?
The samples and the real as well.
So this is the real snare. Let's just see if that some is soloed. Yeah. So I've got that. That's pretty tight. There's a little bit of ring. I've probably. Do you want to have a look at the EQ on the snare?
Yeah,
top?
as well. Yeah,
Let's
definitely.
have a look at that. So what I've done, there's just a little bit of bark getting taken out here in the mids. And this is what you'll probably see as we go through this session, John, is I tend to default to corrective EQ.
Yeah.
I'm usually carving out what I don't like.
Yeah.
Or what's less beneficial, and then I see what's left. And in this instance, you can see that I'm taking out some of the mids where there's a little bit of honk and a little bit of bark later on, just attenuating some of the top end there. But what I've then done is what I'd like to think is a nice, clean, punchy snare, nice little bit of ring that I then reinforce with the samples. So this one, I've actually got it labelled as ring. So I'm going to assume that this drum sample has got a bit of sustain in it. Let's have a listen. Yeah, but you can hear the difference between that and the snare top. Level-wise, it's hardly doing anything.
Yeah.
I think the John Tempesta one will be doing a little bit more of the heavy lifting. Yeah. So you can just hear the difference between these 2 samples. One's quite clean, spitty. The other one's got all of the parallel compression, and it's got the reverbs coming from it. And then once you put it together with the snare top, I've actually got 2 snare tops, by the way.
Okay.
So when we recorded the multi-track, I had if I remember rightly, it was a Neumann KM184 taped to the 57.
Okay, right, yeah.
With them phase aligned with the 184 just slightly backed off. And that gave tonal options, and then we got a snare bottom as well. So as you can see, I've actually multed the snare, and in particularly, let's have a look what I've done. In little sections, little buzz rolls, is I've treated them differently.
Okay.
And so what I'm going to do here is, again, go back to the main snare top, and then what that's supplemented with, firstly, I'll add the ring, which is the really spitty one. She's not doing too much, apart from a bit of...
It's the decay.
Yeah, and those sort of air frequencies up there, right? The spit and the noise.
Yeah.
So it seems that I've got the spit and the noise from this drum sample. Yeah. That's almost like adding a snare bottom to it.
Yeah.
But then the main heavyweight, lifting-wise, is this John Tempesta snare that sounds like this, with the acoustic microphone and the other sample. Take out the two samples, and you get add it, and then just to both the samples you get. So that's just the samples.
Yes.
And then add the snare top.
Yep.
So you're sort of getting a lot of body from the snare top.
And the transient as well, like the actual thing that hits you is from the acoustic. And you said you're not using the snare bottom, but you're kind of getting the snare bottom sound from the ring.
Absolutely.
Instead. And just out of interest, why didn't you use the snare bottom? What was it about it that you didn't like?
There probably would have been something that it just didn't work. And I remember chatting with Andrew Sheps, and I was like, when's the mix finished? And he was like, when things stop annoying me. and that is so true.
It is, isn't it?
When you'll know yourself, you're mixing and there's things that bother you.
Yeah.
And, then there's the Phil Collins aspect about when a mix is finished, it's never finished, it's just abandoned.
That's exactly how I feel about it as well, yeah.
It's so true, there's always...
The problem is that you'll get something that you think is good on the first 2 days, and then at any point after that, you question whether you're making it any better, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in this instance, probably what I was doing with the snare is just moving forward with the snare when it had stopped annoying me. Okay. And for some reason, the snare bottom probably wasn't grooving my truffles, as the saying goes. And I just decided to use a sample to give me what I needed from the snare bottom. And again, you can hear it's just that spit, and as you also say, is that sustain. It's just got that little bit of ring to it.
So you're adding that in instead of having the snare bottom, so it does kind of have that snare bottom effect of the ring of the snares.
Absolutely.
So let's obviously we had a look at the EQ, but what about compression?
Now, interestingly, I'm not a huge compression guy with snare drums. Let's have a look what we've got. So the way that I've got this set up is I've got let me look at my sum. So I've got an acoustic snare sum, and then I've got the drum samples going straight to the drum sum. So interestingly, I am using an 1176. This isn't for signal stability, this is for tone. Okay. This is for distortion, this is for adding some nastiness, and I would imagine on this ring you're probably going to see like a healthy amount of gain reduction to get that spit and sustain. Let's see what it's doing. Yeah, we go. What's that, 10, 12 dB, maybe more? Yeah, about 10, 12 dB of gain reduction during peaks. And I've gone fast attack and not quite, obviously it's an 1176, so it's super fast attack and release anyway, but I've just slightly backed off the release. And that is just for tonal attributes and to get that sustain and spit. So the sample without it would sound like this. Then you can just see that it's just bringing out that sustain. Without, then
it's doing that thing that you were saying earlier about fitting it in. Like you obviously want the transient, but you also want it to sound big, so it kind of makes it less horrible to the ears a little bit, doesn't it? It sort of fixes the top end of it a little bit.
But do you know what? I think you were right. What you picked up on earlier is that all the transients coming from the snare top, this is the thwack. This is your first kind of like 20, 30 milliseconds, your transient here. That's got a pretty hard hit. Yeah. Whereas this, I was probably trying to clear a little bit of that transient out and get it to bring out that sustain. Yeah. I'm looking at a quality that I've not got in the snare itself. I've gated it pretty hard. I've sort of like gone in and got the punch, but then I'm getting the sustain from this other sample. So it's sort of like almost clearing out a little bit the transient to let the natural snare do it, and then bringing out the sustain.
And when we were looking at the EQ as well, getting rid of all that sort of mid-range, the ring will also like you're getting rid of the fatness at the same time, but the ring bothers you. So what's better? Add the sample and get the fatness,
and introduce it in a controllable way.
Exactly.
You've got it over here, and you've got it on a fader, and you can get control over that ring and that fatness. But then we've still got the John Tempesta snare, which again there's a little bit. I've gone with some Pultec on this, and I've just taken out 1K in this sound. And that's about it, actually. There's not too much else going on there. I will have probably used the EQ P1A to look at other gestures. And then here, again, you can see, you know, returning to the same theme, this corrective EQ.
Yep.
I'm just taking out this sort of like mid-range honk that you'll find here. Let's have a listen to it without that EQ. Let's listen to it without the Pultec as well. Sounds like this. Actually, let me just, I'll mute all the effect sends on this as well. Let's have a listen to that. So this is just the snare sample without any verb and without any parallel compression, because we'll probably come back to the parallel compression later on.
Yep.
Sounds like this without any EQ. Then with the EQ in, just sort of like cleaning it up and tightening it up.
Yeah.
And probably more importantly, EQing that so that it's complementing
the transient. Yeah, because obviously all that top end will kind of interfere with it. Yeah, awesome. Let's talk about the shells, kick drum, toms.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to the parallel compression as well.
Now, interestingly on this one, and I don't always do this, but I do change I don't have a fixed methodology for every mix. I do change it a lot. I do use a mix template, which really speeds up my workflow, but I'll never just go with set and forget. I'll never just do, just here's all my processing, off we go.
Yeah.
And the kick drum sounded really well on this one. We triple mic'd it.
Okay.
But I've obviously decided that I will have started with the acoustics, then used a reinforcing sample, and then at some point I've just gone, no, I'm just going to use the kick sample. And my chosen method here, and I'll state my sources here, is I learnt to do this method of sample reinforcement, or in this case replacement, from Andrew Sheps.
Okay.
Now, he's moved on, he's changed from this method. He uses app trigger now, but I still like using this, which is audio to MIDI conversion.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
It's awesome,
It's
right?
so awesome. Yeah, the same thing in Cubase.
Yeah.
You literally just press like a few buttons and it's like done.
Really? Do you not use some DRT, Massey DRT?
No.
Oh, Massey DRT's killer. So very, very simple. I'll just show you Massey DRT. So you go, it's obviously an audio suite plugin, and it is it instrument yet? Massey DRT. And you bring up you analyze it, it gives you all the transients, and then you can start seeing where the miss triggers are. And then once you got the triggers right, you'll drag it in and it just converts it to MIDI, and it retains all your velocities. And then it's like really, really simple. So if I look at my velocity information here, you'll see that this is my snare. There you go. Look at that. You've got all your velocity information at the bottom here. Let me just expand that. See, all of this is tracking the natural velocities of the snare. So you get the snare trigger tracking the velocities perfect. And say, for example, I don't know, maybe this section here, I don't want those velocities. I just want to fix the velocities, and I can just do that.
Drag them. Yeah.
And now you got it like really fixed velocity, but I tend to keep that natural velocity, and that's super fast to do.
Yeah,
and,
super fast, yeah.
And then I put a virtual instrument on it, like Battery 4 or Easy Drummer for my samples.
It's funny, Battery, I've not heard that name in a few years.
Really?
Yeah, I used to use that with the drum kit from Hell originally, which obviously is now Easy Drummer. Yeah, back in the day, yeah, awesome. So you still use Battery now?
Still use Battery now, and the reason I use Battery now is its functionality is pretty awesome. Actually, I'm not using Battery here, I'm using Easy Drummer.
Yeah.
But I've used Battery on the kick drum. And the reason I like Battery on the kick drum is that you've got all these round robin capabilities.
Is this for like envelope filters and stuff like that? Is that what you have?
No, it's actually, so here you can go condition, you can go cycle round robin, cycle random, and so you can have different velocity loads. I actually love Battery, and I'd quite happily bore you for a long time about it. What you can do, so you can see here that I've got this one layer, but if I wanted to, I could set up different triggers from different velocity layers. For example, that kick sample could be triggered from velocity layer, say 97 to 127.
Yeah.
I could have another layer at, 77 to 97 and have different hits. So what I usually do, what I really like doing, is take my own samples from the kit used for tracking.
Yeah.
And I'll take multi-velocity hits.
And then you can just load it into battery and then have a multi-velocity.
Yeah.
It's funny. This is very similar to how battery was the last time I used it, which is close to 20 years ago.
Right, okay.
And you can see where TuneTrack got the randomization feature from.
Yeah, yeah. But it's really nice as well because it can cycle round robins, and you'll go, here's different 8 snare samples of the same velocity, so you don't get the machine gunning, and then it can do a round robin or do it random, and it really keeps it natural. Like if you wanna, I think that's one of the interesting things about some of the Heaviness and metal music production case studies is the extent that Mike Exeter used drum replacement, but got it to sound natural. It's really, really impressive. If you were to listen to Mike Exeter's mix and listen to the drums, you're not going to go, yeah, it sounds like drum replacement. But it is, but he keeps that natural sound.
Because he's keeping the velocity tracks. Now, normally in metal production, I've seen producers just put everything to 127.
Yeah.
So this is this is basically how you're getting the samples to sound natural.
Yeah.
By not just going everything at the top.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can get away with it more with a kick drum. Like the kick drum is the only part of a drum kit that is struck in the same place with every single hit.
Yeah.
Every other part of the drum kit hit in different points. So with the kick drum, you expect quite a lot of dynamic consistency, and not only do you expect it, but you actually want it. You listen to most rock or metal mixes and you listen to the kick drum, it's not going to be changing much dynamically. You don't want to, because particularly with a wall of sound like this, if it starts dipping in level, you're going to lose those kick hits, and you want to keep it full. But your snare drum, you start looking at, grace notes and buzz rolls and even faster blast beats, and if you've got the same velocity, it's just going to start machine gunning, and it's going to sound really fake.
Yeah. Let's have a listen to the kick drum anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see what you've done.
So what I've done here, now this is something that I have started doing, surprisingly, is started using a little bit of reverb on my kick drum, and this is for Cohesion. And it'll be a lot shorter than it'll be shorter than the reverbs that I've used for the snare drum. You can see here, it's around, that surprises me, it's longer than I expected. It's like 1.59 seconds, so it's longer. Let's have a quick listen. And with the reverb, so actually, I mean, it's a thin plate setting on the LX480, and it's probably not used much in level. And what I've also done is I've rolled out the highs.
My next question.
Rolled out the highs and rolls out the. So what you should always do with reverb, you don't want to compromise the quality of the reverb coming out of the reverb plugin. So if you do this, do it pre the reverb. Don't scoop the reverb sound coming out of the reverb. It sounds a lot more natural to do it to the signals getting sent into the reverb, as you can see.
So you're basically pre-EQing the signal before it enters the...
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
And here I'm just kind of like taking out the muddy lows, taking out the washy high end that'll just become a little bit of a wash up there, and just giving it that sense of ambience that'll help it gel with the snare and with the rest of the kit. Yeah,
and it's interesting what you're doing here, because obviously a kick drum, we normally associate having the sub 65 hertz around that sort of area, and then the top end click, either 2K, 8K or whatever, depending on the style of metal.
Yeah.
And you've actually cut both of those areas out.
On the reverb, I have here,
You're basically using it as a way just to make the kick drum sit in within the space that you're trying to create for the whole band.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, very interesting.
And just saying that I don't want the lows in the reverb, and I don't want the highs. I don't want this washy high-end kick sound. I just want some mids reverb that'll just help it gel with the rest of the drums, and that just a very subtle contribution towards Cohesion. But what I've also got, more importantly with Cohesion, is I've got these sends that are going to parallel compression along with the snare drum. We can look at them later if you like.
We can take a look probably now, actually. And
cool.
The same with the toms, I guess it's the same concept.
Absolutely.
Reverb going in, a little bit of compression. And did you sample the toms as well?
I didn't. there's no sample. Oh no, I did. I do tell a lie. I've actually used a sample reinforcement with the toms. So, let's have a look at that.
Let's have a look at the toms first, and then we'll check out the parallel compression on the drum.
Yeah. So what we've got here is you can see here's the top and the bottom, and let's listen to both of those. Let's just take the kick drum out for a second. As you can see, there's quite a lot of reverb there. Let's just make sure that the group is, let me see what we've got here. Yeah, to the toms sum, which is, where's my toms sum? It is, it's over here. And so there's my toms, yeah. So you can see, I've done a little bit, I've got some compression on the tom, so that's just the, if we listen to all the acoustic microphones, you get this. And if we add the drum samples into those, you can just see that it's not providing a huge amount level-wise. You can see it's towed right back. Same with tom 2, same with tom 3, and with the floor sample, and you get, it's adding,
it's reinforcing like the actual note
absolutely
of the tom.
I spend a long time picking tom samples. If you start getting tom samples that are very varied in pitch from the natural toms, it's going to sound awful.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the most important things. So I spent quite a long time just picking the right samples here, and then just marginally reinforcing them. But there's the bit of the stick attack, and then from there, what I do with toms is always, I will look at what the kind of tonal footprint of the kick drum is.
Yeah.
And if the kick's really clicky and bright and aggressive, I'll do the same with the toms.
Okay, yeah.
And then, conversely, if it's dark, I'll obviously do the same with the toms. But in this instance here, you'll see that the parallel compression here, I've taken the same sends to the parallel compressors, obviously in different ways. I've got a dedicated toms verb, but I'm also sending it to a snare verb as well.
Okay,
so,
right, yeah.
So the two verbs that we looked at earlier, the plate and the large wood room, I'm sending the toms to the snare verb, let me look at which one that is, which is the plate.
Okay.
So yes, I'm sending the toms to the plate, but also sending it to its own dedicated reverb. And I would imagine that the reverb is the large wood room again. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's the large wood room again, but I've got it controlled differently. And what I've done here, and I didn't want to do this with the other reverbs, is have the Studer A800 on it just to add that warmth.
Right, yep.
So yeah, you can see a lot of treatment of my reverb returns, and that's something I've got more and more into.
Okay,
is really sculpting those reverbs. You can have your snare drum really clean, really powerful, great tone, and then you can add reverb, and it just brings out qualities in your snare sound that you wouldn't want. So I'm usually sculpting the reverb that's coming out, and a lot of the time I'm doing the polar opposite of Chris Lord-Alge. And he's like, he does this big smiley face on his reverbs, and it works for him because his mixes are incredible, right?
Yeah.
And I don't do that. And I asked Andrew Sheps if he ever does that, and he doesn't do that either. But I don't think Andrew does much to his reverb returns. But what I'm doing here, I'm high pass filtering here, not much going on, not too much going on there. But as you can see with some of my other reverb returns, it's really sculpting them to get them to work within the mix.
Perfect. Yeah, awesome. How about the parallel compression? Like, what's going on here, and what's the purpose of it? What
is going on here? So I was very, very fortunate enough to do a project with Andrew Sheps where I was sort of like helping out with the production. It was a band called the HU.
Yeah,
from Mongolia.
Great band. Yeah, great band.
I saw them live at Glastonbury last year. They were awesome. They were really good. And so I was in the very lucky position to get Andrew's mix template from him, which and this is one of the nice things that I liked, is everybody thinks it's parallel compression, but it's actually different treatment here. So he's got he uses the Devil Lock, which is really nice. Audio Level Destroyer as one, and then he's got the 670 as another one. And then he's got the Fatso Junior. Now the Fatso Junior is really nice.
Yep.
I've actually got the hardware version, the EL7X there in my rack, and I use that quite a lot on vocals and bass. That's really, really deadly. And then also at the far end here, we got the DBX 160.
Yep.
And then you're just pretty much feeding different levels of these and going, okay, so what's the Devil Lock sound like? Okay, that's not so great, but let's see what the DBX sounds like, and just getting different qualities from it. And you've got different send levels from the kick and the snare and the toms according to what those parallel compressors bring out. But importantly, no matter how you're using them in levels, it's adding to that sense of cohesion.
So you're using 4 parallel compressions.
Yeah.
And then blending between those to then have a master.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've never seen anyone do that before, because normally you would stack them after one another.
Yeah.
Rather than 4 separate to have different tonal qualities.
Increasingly, I've gone more and more towards this with my mixing, is I'll have different qualities on different faders. And I learned this from Jens Bogren.
Okay.
When Jens Bogren first told me about how he, we'll come back onto the bass later on, but when he first told me about how he frequency bracketed bass, and I was like, you can actually see in the interview, I'm going, really? You use the DI for the lows? And I'm thinking, there's no low, there's not much. But then you actually frequency bracket the DI to the lows, and it's really clean and it works super well.
Yeah.
And then I got more and more into frequency bracketing, looked at other producers doing it, and I've sort of like taken that in a bit further. But what I really like is having this really intuitive method of mixing, which is you've got different qualities and different faders, and you've already seen it already. You've got, here's your spit, here's your ring, here's your body.
Yeah.
Then you've got your reverbs, here's your kind of like short plate, here's your longer room, parallel compressors or parallel processing to more likely like with the Devil Lock and the Fatso. And here's something that brings out the ring of the snare, or here's some real bark to the snare drum, or here's just some cool kind of texture. It's adding something cool to the texture of the drum. And then you've got that fader always there
play around with,
just to play around with.
So I can imagine that this would get quite messy if they're too loud.
Very much.
Because what we were talking about again earlier, the clarity versus the fatness, and obviously this is adding to the fatness.
Yeah.
But then the more you turn it up, you hear the clarity go away, right? Yeah.
It's that Goldilocks zone.
Exactly.
It's got to just be right.
Exactly, yeah.
And so a lot of it's quite nice. It's just kind of like playing with faders. Often I'll go with a lot more drum samples than this, and like, here's one, for the spit, one's got some real sustain, one's about the low end, one's just kind of like a lot higher pitch than the other ones.
Yeah.
And that brings out a little bit of top end sizzle to it, and that kind of thing. And you go into faders instead of using EQ units or compression to mix.
Let's have a listen. I'm really intrigued to hear these 4 separate. Can we hear the whole drum kit?
Yeah. And I tell you what, I'll make, I'm loving this, by the way, because I've not listened to this mix for quite a long while. So I'm like pulling things up and it's like, oh, what did I do?
Yeah.
So I'll make a prediction though. I'll make a prediction that the parallel compression isn't doing a huge amount, but we'll see. So what we'll do, let's start with the parallel compression out. Let me do it that way. Let me do that. Let's have a listen without the parallel compression. Then here it comes. Oh no, it is. Without. With. Wait till it goes into the beat. With. Snare. Definitely. Without. With. Without. Just.
It's that weight of the snare. It's really helping with that more than anything.
Yeah.
Like the fatness. It's like really emphasizing those low mids.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say the thwack. It's more the weight of it.
Yeah. I would agree.
It almost feels like the stick. You can hear the stick. When you start standing in a room with the drums, and when the drummer does a rim shot, you feel it in your bones. That's what that's doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me.
Yeah, I can hear that. That's definitely lifting that out. Different mixes, I'd probably be using more of that, but relatively restrained on this one.
I mean, it sounds great.
Thank you.
So perfect. And then just one last element of the drums, and then we can move on to, the other elements, but the overheads.
Yeah, now, overheads are an interesting one. They're absolutely critical to a metal record, right?
Yeah, completely.
It's all your subdivisions, all your energy is going, and it's actually really hard. There's in most mixes for me, there's a very fine level where the overheads are contributing just enough, and you push it just, half a dB more, and it's going to get abrasive. You go the opposite way, and you start losing your energy.
It just feels like a wash, right? Rather than actually hearing the cymbals. Yeah.
And so, like Andy Sneap's quite well renowned for being very restrained with his cymbal levels. Very restrained. I remember, chatting with Mike Exeter about that, and I think what I'm trying to do with the cymbals, is just get the energy out of them. So let's have a look what I've done here. So what happened with this recording is that we went for space pair, and then we did paired cymbal miking. And what I've really used here is that the main pair of the cymbal mics, and rather than I think I've gone with the space. I think we did a space pair and then paired cymbal mics, and I think I've mainly gone with the space pair. So we've got the space pair here going to a sum, and we'll have a look at the sum in a second. But here you can just see this is going to the metal sum, and over here you can see this is the metal sum. Quite a lot going on the sum, but all we've got on the actual individual channels is just high pass filtering, and then just marginally taming a little bit of the sizzle in the top end, just from 60 dB upwards.
Yep.
And I've gone pretty aggressive there. I've gone up to 650.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll rarely go above that. So what this tells me, a lot of producers would hate this, and they'd say, what are you doing? You're taking all of the lovely snare sound out of your overheads.
Yeah.
But for me, what I wanted on this mix is I just wanted those tracks to be the cymbals. I want to turn them up and control the cymbals. And the reason for that is I got the snare sound that I wanted from my snare top and from the samples. And then so when I come here, I don't want to change my carefully constructed snare sound.
Yeah.
I mean, there's usually three options that you'll go with. You'll probably go with setting your high pass filter at like 200, just below the fundamental of the snare, or then go with them really low, so you're getting the kick drum off the mic. Now, I'll never ever get the kick drum off the overhead mics. So your overhead mics are facing downwards, and your kick drum's projecting horizontally. So all of that kick drum's completely off axis, and to me it sounds horrible. I've never wanted a kick sound in my overheads, like I say, because this off axis and stuff. So I'll generally go between 200 and 650.
Yeah.
And for a mix like this, if it was a slower, band that is more groove orientated and I don't need as much control, like we were chatting about earlier, I'd probably might go a little bit earlier. But here I want complete control and go as much as possible. I just want the cymbals off these tracks. They're getting sent to the group, and on the group, again, I've high pass filtered again. That's really saying I don't want anything below this. This is the cut point. So, similar. To be fair, I could have just doubled the pole position setting of the filter and it would have done the same job. But nevertheless, it's just doubled up. And you can see again, I'm just taming this top end brightness. What else I've got here is a little bit more EQ. I've obviously found some of this snare that's up here that I'm not liking, and some abrasion up here. Yeah. So quite expensive treatment here.
I wonder if that EQ is actually doing some of that lower washiness of the cymbals on some of the bigger cymbals, maybe as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's see if I'm hitting it particularly hard with the compression. I'd be surprised if I am. It's literally just kissing it with the snare.
And it's literally just the snare. It's not even touching the cymbals.
So there's not too much going on there. I think that was probably just to bring out the little bit of snare that is in there. Then I've gone with a little bit of treatment from Mr. Andrew Shep's Omni channel, which again, there's not too much going on there at all. There's just a little bit of FET compression. Again, this is probably looking at this from my mix template where I've brought it in and then adjusted it and just left it on there, even though it's just just kissing it. But probably more important than those last two gestures, the compression gestures, is soothe. This is soothe 2.
Yeah.
You can see if I play it, you've got, like, without, just sort of like just hitting your ears a bit. And that's just pushing those cymbals back in.
It's mainly in the hats that I could hear it.
Absolutely. Because, hats is the madman of the key. If you've got a drummer who hits his hats too hard, then every cymbal on the whole microphone becomes a hats mic, super, super annoying.
So I guess we should move on to the final element of the drums, the room mics, right?
Yeah, so we had lots of fun with room mics on this one. We actually put up a Blumline pair, but one of the microphones on the Blumline pair, or a cable, whereas it was fine at the beginning of the recording, it decided to give up the ghost. So there's one side of the Blumline pair, and then there's two different room mics. And let's have a look. One's cardioid and one's omni. And what I've just done with these, different producers like Logan Mader, he likes his room mics to be super wide.
Yeah.
And he'll get them really high and really wide, and that works well for Logan. But I don't like room mics that high because they just pick up that cymbal wash. And I'm always going to give the traditional smash treatment with the compression.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that brings out the abrasion of the cymbals. So usually I inevitably keep my room mics well away from the overheads and keep them about knee height. So I'll generally set up a Blumline pair around knee height, set up a couple of room mics. But this is the Blumline pair. Let's just knock off the processing. So this is just the recording. And then with the processing.
Oh yeah.
There's all that low end.
And all the top end.
Yeah. So I'm actually hitting about, maybe 10, 15 dB during peaks, gain reduction. Again, back to the 1176. But interesting what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
This same thing, this frequency bracketing thing. I don't want the lows and I don't want the highs. This is gonna, like, I know Snape likes room mics because it adds to the sustain of cymbals. But I actually got what I needed from the space pair with the sustain of the cymbals, and there's a bit of compression kissing it. And here I just wanted some mid-range bark from the drums. And do you know what? It's the same with the next microphone. This is the cardioid room mic, which again, without processing, sounds like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Similar treatment again.
Similar
smashed.
treatment. And then this is the Omni, same, whoops, try again. Let me go back to that one. And this is the Omni room mic. And with the treatment, you put all them three together. They're not doing a huge big deal.
No.
I don't always have parallel compression and the room mics, but you can see here that there's a little bit from the room mics and there's a little bit from the parallel compression, and I've got them to work in their own way, and putting it all together. And if I just take out the room mics, you get. I'm not hearing any change, to be honest.
No, it's very, very quiet, isn't it?
Yeah, so you could probably mute those room mics and you're not going to hear a difference. I've left them in there. I was probably bringing them up and losing that clarity, and I've just brought them back down and left them there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not really adding anything, but I bet if you took them out, you'd probably instantly hear it.
Yeah,
maybe. We'll see.
The only other thing that I've got here, and I learnt this off the guy who mixed Lorna Shaw's breakthrough album, who's what's his name? Yeah,
Josh.
Yeah, that's
Schrader,
right. Yeah. So he uses cymbal samples to punctuate certain cymbal hits. So that was a nice trick that I learned. So as you can see here, there's just that's a Sepultura big floor tom hit that I use for some big hits, which is nice. But you'll just see down here, it's a reverse cymbal. So this is what we've got here.
Yeah.
Just a reverse cymbal hit into certain sections. And then further up, what you will see is Yeah. And I haven't used cymbal samples on this one, but what I have used, yeah, you're going to like this, John. Listen to this.
Is that timpani?
No, I don't know what it is.
What's that other kind of massive drum that's used in a lot of film music? It sounds like one of those.
A big fuck off drum.
Yeah.
It's that one. It's a big fuck off drum.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's definitely one of those.
And what are you using that for?
Just to, if there's big tom hits, you know,
Yeah.
I want to punctuate them with a load of weight and a load of sustain, and that's what that's doing. I've also, here's the cymbal samples that I have used. I've used a sub here, a little bit of a sub drop. You always like that. A China sample.
Okay, yeah.
And then a gong. And I've actually stacked them up. So what you've got here is a little bit of ear candy on this particular. You've got a reverse big fuck off drum, and then you've got the drum hit itself, and then you've got a sub hit, a China, and a gong just to really put together. Put that within the track.
Yeah.
And you'll hear this, you'll hear another hit coming up. Just to give it a bit of
the production elements, just so that certain bits jump out. If you like, you were saying, like having the first cymbal and first kick, the chorus hit harder. This is kind of what this is doing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, sonic impact.
Yeah, awesome. Well, drums sound awesome, mate.
Well, I thank you.
Should we move on to what you did with the bass, the next thing in the mix? And you know, I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, what do you do about processing the bass then? Like, how many tracks are we running here?
Well, interestingly, there's only 3 here. So this
only
mix, only 3. I'm usually up to 5 or 6, but the foundation of my bass sound these days is this. This is the Trondheim Ska Bass 1.
Okay.
And I introduced Andrew Sheps to this, and he went out and got one immediately, and he sort of endorses them. I introduced My Dying Bride to this, and they're endorsed by them now. It's phenomenal.
Okay.
It, in my humble opinion and experience, it is far better than other manufacturers that are trying to give driven-based bass sounds. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's got all the note definition that you want, and when it adds the drive, it keeps the drive in the mid-range in a way that you don't get the muddy lows and you don't get the abrasive highs. And that's what I was doing for years, is I was getting the Sans amp that we chatted about earlier, the PSA one, distorting it and then frequency bracketing it so that you knock out the muddy lows and the abrasive highs, and then feeding that into the bass sound. And I'll still do that on some bass sounds, but this now, the Ska Bass one, is my go-to. And I'm pairing it up with the 2 notes, and I've actually got a guitar cab on it. And that's inevitably, that's kind of like the foundation of my bass sound. And you can see that it is here. And what I've actually done, this differs from other mixes I've got. I've actually got 4 bass tracks, but for the main body of the bass sound, I've only got 3 bass tracks. This is the Ska Bass 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, have that. It's that bass one, you got all your note definition.
And that's the pedal.
That's it. That's it. That's that. Nothing else. So it's gone from the Trondheim to the 2 notes.
Yep.
And in that, I've actually, like I say, I've got a guitar cab. I actually scrolled through all the pre-settings within that, and there's a guitar cab, and it sounds great through a guitar cab and a guitar speaker, better than any of the bass speakers.
I mean, it makes sense, because if you think about metal, what you're trying to do with the bass is you're trying to make the bass and the guitar be as one. Very
true. And also is, I think that there's something about a guitar speaker translates that distortion arguably better than a
yeah.
bass
12
speaker.
is better than a 10, which is better than a 15.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I'd never use a 15. I've never used one that, you know, just too big, too subby for metal. But that's the Scar bass one. But what I'm actually doing is there's a little bit of treatment there. I've got auto align, which I'll come to in a second. And this is the Scar bass one. There's, yeah, again, returning to this theme of corrective EQ. I'm just notching out little bits of abrasion, and just trying to get that bass sound as smooth as possible. If I knock that EQ move out, you get this, which sounds awesome. It's absolutely phenomenal.
It sounds great,
right?
yeah. It sounds really good.
But what I'm trying to do is I don't want that bass sound to tread on the guitars.
Which is what it's doing.
Yeah. So once you listen to that in solo, and that's great. It doesn't matter what it sounds like in solo. It needs to be sat with the guitars. So I'm punching little holes into it to go in, sit back there, whoa, buddy, get back in there with the guitars. And then I've got some compression going on, API. And I've gone pretty fast attack here, fast release, just to really smooth it out. Faster release because it's a pretty faster track in sections. Studio A800 just to smooth it out. I do love the Studio A800. I actually usually use, let me see if I've used it on this. I use Heat. I've not used Heat on this mix.
Okay.
I usually do really like Heat, but I've gone towards the Studio A800. And then lastly, I've decided that despite all those cuts, I just want a broad cue that goes, let me bring back a bit of this note definition, but in a more controlled, broader cue that I can just control. But then what I'm doing is I'm supplementing it with this, which, hats off to him, this is Jens Bogren.
Okay.
So we've got the bass DI. This is just the bass DI, which if I just bypass the processing, you'll hear. And what I've done here is, actually, I tell a lie. Let me just have a quick... No, actually, I haven't done it on this one. This is interesting. I thought I'd done my usual trick of Jens Bogren's trick, but again, it's lovely looking through this multi-track. I've not done it. This is just a broad, kind of like adding some of the note definition and the brightness here, a couple of cuts to the abrasion. Usually that DI, I'm surprised I didn't do it, is usually frequency bracketed for the lows.
Okay, right, yeah.
And again, as I said earlier, I'll change my methodology for each mix. And I didn't on this one. What I've just done, hit it with series compression, 3 milliseconds attack time, very fast attack time on that, split the load between them. And then what I have done is I've used the DI, I've duplicated the DI and used the parallax on it. And this is how the parallax sounds. Rolled off all those highs, compressed it pretty hard, series compression. Although that's one of those compressors is not even working again. It's probably from my template and I've just left it on there. But where the main amount of compression is sitting, the last bass track, by the way, is there's a clean section within this song where I needed a completely clean bass sound. Let's have a quick look at that, which is here. And all I've done in this section, where the guitars drop out. So Luke Appleton, who was the bass player on this track, there's this lovely little bass run that he's done here, and I've multed it just to give it a slightly cleaner sound. I don't want the parallax on this track because it would sound too much because the guitars are out. So basically what you got, let's have a listen to all 3 bass signals together, and then we'll have a quick look at what I'm doing on the sum. So this is bass sound put together. Without the DI.
Yeah, okay.
Then parallax and the DI. Then add it to the drums.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Thank you.
The DI sort of handling all the low end information the tightness of the low end, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
But what I've then done on the bass some is I usually hit basses really hard with compression. Again, these notches, and it's just to push it back in to the mix and get it to sit with the guitars. We'll maybe have a listen to with the guitars in a moment. More API 2500 with splitting the compression, 3 milliseconds, and very, very fast attack. I think 0.3 here, and then a little bit of, again, got note definition just to add a bit there, and then a limiter strapped across it just to say that's enough, you're going no further.
Yeah.
And then what I've done here is I've started using a little bit of stereo widening with the bass these days. What I've done is I've actually just high pass filtered it so it's only affecting the top end, and just this is spreading the pitch.
Yeah, so
I've gone 8 cents up and 8 cents down.
And you just want a little bit of width.
Yeah,
that
awesome. Just widens it. So it's a little bit of pitch shifting, but only to the upper frequencies, pan left and pan right. And what you'll see is that that's panned 8 cents up. This one is panned 8 cents down, as you can see there.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I've just sent this to a sum, and there's just, to be honest, it'll be doing very, very little. Let's see if we can hear what it's doing.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a chorus effect, almost a tiny little bit.
Super subtle though, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll just briefly listen to the bass with the guitars sound like this. Yeah.
Those guitars, very mid-range forward.
Yeah.
Like extreme note definition. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, so again, I think what I wanted on this one is to have a thicker, fuller guitar sound. I didn't want to, I've got a little bit of those, bored of those super scooped guitar
where you can't hear the note.
But you can't hear the note. And as you can hear then, that's really, you've hit the nail on the head actually.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to bring out here, is the note all the time. There's faster sections, there's some really cool runs on the guitars, and there's some really great riffing. And so I was trying to get a little bit of a more mid-range based tone. And what I've done processing wise is fairly minimalistic. I've started off with a multi-band compressor, and you'll just see that hitting on the chugs. In fact, if we go for the beginning of the song. From the solitude of Trojan's heart, race. Whenever those chugs are hitting, it's just tightening those up.
Yeah.
You get this sort of what I refer to as chug thump, where all the energy of the guitar sound gets redirected towards the lows. So it's just containing a little bit of that. Then there's some serious EQ use, I would imagine, that there usually is. So again, I'm just a little bit of surgical EQ on the low mids and on the tops here. Again, leaving the mids where I am. You can probably see I've experimented with where I want the mids going, but left it. Got a little bit of a bump at about 92 on the guitars. And what you'll probably see, if I go back to the bass, you'll probably start to see different areas where the bass has been pulled at 670. That's a little bit of a Black Album trick. Metallica's Black Album is wipe the bass out at 650, and again it just pushes it back in and just gets this separation between the bass and the guitars. But yeah, back to the guitars on one side, dealing with the low mud range, and then again, just some of these cuts. And what I'm doing, just a couple of subtle things here, so you can see that between these two EQs, and I'm just carving away.
Yeah.
I'm just carving away until what I'm left with is what I want. There's some mid-range stuff pulled here. I'm pulling some sort of 2K out and some surgical moves here, but it's quite a lot of corrective EQ, and there's only one additive EQ just to put the low end.
And the boost
in.
is almost like the cab fart,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want, when you palm mute and you feel the cab rattle, it's kind of trying to emulate that, isn't it?
Yeah,
From what
absolutely.
I can hear.
And I've done a probably similar approach, but different from the other side. Yeah, similar thing. Hasn't got the boost there. It's more corrective EQ here, and that, you know, it seems like quite a lot of EQ, and it is. you know,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
When I asked Buster Odo about, like, you know, he was so funny. I said, you know, can metal music be overproduced? And he was like, yeah, all of my albums are. And he was quite open about it. It's like, I want everything to sound as great as it can. So usually with guitars, I'm just going in there and just carving away and just kind of like, what's annoying me? I'll listen to it in the mix. What's grabbing my ear? What am I really not liking? And then going in there and taking care of it. It's just a lot of corrective EQ.
Yeah. Okay.
And a little bit of multi-band. On the sum, I've not got any EQ, so what I've done here is I've differentiated the two sides, playing the guitars on their own. So I play it from the verse.
So, two different amps,
Yeah,
either side.
yeah.
And what is on the left and what is on the right?
That's a very good question. One which, when I reamp the guitars, I'd have to have a look. I think I would probably imagine it's the 5150 Mark III on one side and probably the 5150 Mark I on the other.
Okay, yeah.
But what I have done perhaps is more important. So yeah, you're right. I've gone for, let's just have a listen to that. Whoops.
It's interesting from this perspective where I'm sat right now. This one has more mid-range. That one's slightly more scooped.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because of my seating position, but
you're absolutely right. Yeah. And so if you've got two, I mean, Machine Head go for, they'll find one rhythm sound and they'll quad track it, and they love that, and they like the slight chorusing that they get from that. What I usually like, I sometimes, if I've got the same rhythm sound in the left and the same rhythm sound in the right, obviously you've got to think about how many guitarists are in the band and whether you've got different tonal identities, right? Whether you've got, you know, two guys trying to differentiate the tone. But what I'll often do, even if it's the same amp on both sides, I'll differentiate the EQ just to make them sound a bit wider. It can sound a bit what I refer to as big mono.
Yes.
And that you've got two different, you know, you've got the same sound left and right. And I've decided to not go with quad tracking on this one. We had quad track guitars, but I decided to just go with the doubles, just double tracked. I didn't think adding any of the quads was working for me, and that guitar sound was working.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, it sounds great. And I think that when I first came in and listened to this mix, I said, wow, the guitars sound like they've got this huge 600 hertz boost.
Yeah.
And it's probably because you cut the bass at 600 and it was emphasizing that through everything else on the guitar.
Yeah, I mean, or potentially I'd carved away and what was left is 600
hertz, yeah.
And then, you know, potentially it's a case of, well, that is as I intend it to, and the 600 needs to stay there. I you know, I'll probably go for some brightness and I'll probably go for some low end boosts, but usually I'm just all about corrective EQ.
Sounds great. I mean, you can hear every single note on that guitar, which is
that's
a challenge in when you've got the fast tremolo picking and the slow sections as well. Yeah, it's
absolutely.
awesome.
Thanks, John.
Right, as you explained at the beginning, there's a lot of orchestration elements within this as well. So let's take a look at that. What have you done to them?
So there's a string stem that I've dealt with here, and what you'll just see is just a really high pass filter in it. Yeah. There's not enough room in the lows for these strings, so I'm really just sort of like picking it out from about 500-ish upwards and just getting the top end, and a little bit of soothe just to take out some of the abrasions in the strings. and then the Studio A800. So on its own, it probably might sound quite thin. I would imagine it sounds like this. But without the processing, that's just too big. Yeah. And then, you know, once you get that and sit it with the guitars, just getting that top end.
Yeah, I mean, if all of that kind of stuff on the strings, it would really interfere with the mid-range on the guitars.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And the low end on the guitars as well, and it would just start muddying it up. And I don't want anything messing with the guitars or the bass really. So just thin those strings out, and then here we've got a little bit later on. We've got this little piano section. There's probably very little treatment there. It's not a significant part. I've just got what I refer to as an uber long reverb, and if I go to uber long reverb, over here, is it? No, it must be over here somewhere. There it is. You'll probably just see it's a massive gopping reverb is the technical way to refer to it. It's a 4-second reverb there, and not much. I mean, I've left the piano as it is and just given it a bit of compression. The guitars are out at this point, so it's just this. Yeah, and then later on, very briefly, we've got this brass and horns stem. I remember myself and Jan flushing them through virtual instruments with the MIDI that we got sent for these parts, and we were like, whoa, brass can sound heavy. And this is how the brass sounds.
Yeah.
So obviously they've got tubas and they've down-tuned them.
Yeah. Really low. Yeah.
Really nice low notes. So there's probably not too much treatment going on there. Again, just a bit of high-pass filtering, a little bit of brightness, just allowing them to do the job. And that's something that's a critical mix skill that people overlook. A critical mix skill is the avoidance of over-processing.
Yeah.
So if something doesn't need processing, it doesn't, and it's doing its job and it's fulfilling its role within the mix and it's not stamping on any of the intended roles of it, fine.
Yeah.
Leave it. So that's pretty much the, I've got a separate strings verb here, and you got your uber long reverb, just give me separate control here, and that's about it for the orchestration. It is stemmed down, which made my job a little bit easier.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I guess there was hundreds of tracks before it was stemmed down, right?
There was, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. I mean, it all sounds great, not much processing, and it does the job, as you say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm guessing how you built this was you built the band first with the drums, bass, guitars to get the overall sonic quality that you wanted.
Yeah, you know what? I'll often start with drums and I'll go left to right across the desk and sort of like build it up from the kick and then add the bass. But I actually started with the guitars on this one.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I went with the guitars. Spent a couple of hours the guitars to knock them into shape and get an idea of how we were going to get these notes out of the guitars and get that sort of like weight. So I went with the guitars and then went to the drums and then started putting everything together bass wise and then slotted everything together from there.
Perfect. Now, with a guitar being so mid-rangey, how did you find fitting the vocals in, and what did you do to the vocals in order for them to sort of stand out against such a mid-range guitar? And the reason I'm asking that is because obviously they kind of sort of have the same frequency bands, guitars and vocals, very closely. So
that's right. And with vocals, and particularly in the metal mix, a lot of it's about brightness. And if a vocal is a lot brighter than the rhythm guitars, you're never going to find the right mix area for the vocals because it's always going to be more proximate, closer to you than the rhythm guitars, and you'll always be chasing the mix level. Conversely, if the vocal is darker than the guitars, it'll just sound a bit... So you need to really kind of balance up the rough levels of brightness between the vocal and the guitars, but the guitars aren't particularly bright. So although I'll look at this is Ralph Sheepers from Primal Fear, who's on vocals. And what you'll see here is there's a marginal brightening up, and the reason for this is that the guitars aren't particularly bright. In some instances, I'd be going with a shelf and boosting maybe 3 or 4 up to 3 or 4 dB by like maybe 3, 4K, 6K upwards, depending on how it works. But here again, there's just some pockets of corrective EQ, some surgical moves here, and then that's pretty much it. What I've done is minimal from a compression perspective, and the reason for that is that Ralph has got his own studio and he prints with his own compression.
Oh, really? So it's almost like a pre-compression for you.
Yeah, so it's all printed compression. So when it came across, it didn't need that much. I have hit it with a G bus in 1176, but I don't think it's doing much. We'll have a quick listen. Let's have a quick listen to where are we in the song? Let's listen to here.
See a blind man run this maze.
Yeah, so if I just split the two compressors, you got a few dB on the SSL and you got a few dB on the 76.
See a blind man run this maze.
And the 76 is probably more for texture more than anything, so I didn't really need to do too much. And in this instance, the compression was really good, the way that Ralph treated it. All that I've done on the end, I've got a little bit of a brightness move, if I'm not mistaken.
That's like an 81, isn't it?
Yeah, just on the top end here, just marginal. And that's about it. And the reason I actually like the 1081 for its brightness, there's the 1081s and the E series SSL, they're beautiful. They're very musical EQs. They really are. If you want to brighten something up in a really musical way, they're really nice. But again, hitting the A800 at 30 IPS here, just to add that sense of warmth. So again, there's not too much going on vocally on the lead vocal. What I have done though is I went through and manually just dealt with some of the sibilants there, and I didn't DS the lead vocal. I actually manually went through it, and you can learn so much from pop producers. You watch them boys and you watch them. I mean, listen to like Rihanna's Diamonds, and you listen to that vocal, and it is perfect. It's like every syllable is completely clear. There's nothing that's harsh, there's nothing that's dull, there's nothing that's muddy. It's an absolute, and they are super patient. They'll go through and they will EQ different syllables. It's amazing watching them.
And then the vocal rider on like something like Adele as well. Instead of using compression, it's just all over the place.
Absolutely.
Which requires a certain amount of patience, doesn't it?
It really does. And they'll often go syllable by syllable. I've not done that with Ralph. It didn't need to, but I've manually DS with clip gain. What I've done on the backing vocals though, so with backing vocals, you don't want backing vocals interfering with the lead vocal. The way you do that is, firstly, you have the backing vocals less bright and thinner sounding than the lead vocal. So what you'll probably see here is there's more corrective cuts here to make it thinner.
Yeah.
So with it being thinner, it's never going to supersede the lead vocal, and you compress it harder. So what you'll see here is you've got the compression on the vocal sum, and I've got a bit of LA2A action here. Yeah. With that being compressed harder, with it being less bright and with it being thinner, it's never going to mess with the lead vocal. It's never going to supersede its mix level. It's going to stay where it is. And I also hit the BVs with quite a lot of de-essing. I mean, a lot of producers completely remove the S's on backing vocals.
Exactly, yeah. And then what about the effects on the lead vocals to make it sit right?
Effects, big time. So I've got this quite extensive effects chain here, and what we've got, it's all going to this effects sum here. I've got a spreader. It's what I refer to as pitch thickening width enhancement. What you've got is you've got one pitched up 8 cents, one's down 8 cents, and then you've got automatic double tracking, which is about 20 milliseconds. Okay. And what I've done is varied the central point of automatic double tracking, one at 16 milliseconds. I would imagine this is at 24. Yeah, at 24. So the ADT, the center point, is that. And then you've got one pitched up and with a little bit of ADT, and one pinch down with a little bit of ADT, but the middle section of the automatic double tracking delay, 20 milliseconds time, you've got them panned hard left and right, and that adds width to the vocals.
Yeah.
And I've also gone more width to the vocals, is I've got the S1 imager from Waves to really, because it's a monophonic instrument at the end of the day. The guitars are nice and wide, and I needed to get this a little bit wider. There's a little bit of soothe on the master bus there, a little bit of 1081, and then we've already looked at the 76 and the Studer A800. So other effects, we got the H910, the Eventide, which is, again, it's just a little bit of vocal thickener. It's
almost like a slapback.
Yeah, and not using it a huge amount, and then again coming back to this recurring theme of different qualities on different faders. You've got a plate, you've got a room, you've got an eighth delay, you've got a second eighth delay, you've got a slap, and you've got a long delay. Then you've got a harmony, a guitar harmony, a further harmony, and an octave down. I don't think I'll be using those very much. I certainly wouldn't be sending much mix level, but that's my effects chain where I'll go, okay, 3, maybe 4 different reverbs. How do they sound? 3, 4 different delay lines, and then work out how they sound, and then work out how they interact.
And that's all just for the vocals?
All just for the vocals.
Yeah. And that's just to make it sit right and slightly above the mix.
Do you know what? I look years ago, and I just used to go, well, what do you do with a vocal, right? You sort of like, you EQ it, you compress it, stick a reverb on it, bus it to a reverb, bus it to a delay, off you go. And I've changed so much with that. You can do so much with vocals to give them that depth and dimension and that width, and to give them that sense of quality and sheen and size. And I spend a long time on vocals now, getting that. And let's have a quick listen. We'll have a listen to, let's see where there's a bit of a vocal stack going on. Let's take this section here. Not quite a vocal stack, with some vocal doubles and harmonies going on here. Let's see how that sounds.
In solitude, I was saved by a plague of angels. In solitude.
Yeah, you want those backing vocals to almost be like synth pads.
Yeah.
Like to reinforce the main vocal and not overtake it.
Yeah. And then later on, you've got these further harmonies that come in here. These are the proper backing vocals. We'll listen to those with the lead vocal sound like this.
The only way out is inside. The only way to be noticed is to hide. The only way out is inside.
It's funny, isn't it? Everything that you do on vocals, when you solo it, you're like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And a lot of those delays and a lot of those reverbs actually go and sort of sit back. They're not as prominent. You always go way overboard. You can hear it. The moment you turned that on, all of it didn't disappear.
It just gets soaked up.
It gets soaked up and becomes part of the performance. And that's kind of like the magic of all that vocal. Because if you take all that out, the vocal sounds wrong.
Yes.
It seems so separate from the music, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it just pushes it back into the mix a little bit. That reverb and delay sets up this sort of perceptual barrier between you and the sound, because it's giving the idea that you're in a larger environment and the performer's further away from you, and just sits it back. But here we can just see a couple of interesting things on the plate here. I've added some tape, some analog processing, just to sort of like an analog signal path, just to help sit it back. And then you've got just different approaches here. You've got a slap delay, which is an Elvis Presley style slap delay, no repeats at 125 milliseconds. And so, back in the days with rockabilly, the slap delay was roughly around 150 milliseconds with no repeats on it. A simple way to do this is just, if you've got your plug-in, is just look at what the subdivisions of the track were and get it as close to 150. In this case, I've got 125 at this tempo. And that's a really nice way to start. Then add some eighth delay notes and then a long delay and maybe some multi-tap delays, then just play with them. Just play with the faders, just this intuitive way to mixing with playing with the faders or play with the, you know, the send levels. And then what I tend to do though is I usually lean more heavily on delay lines than reverb. Okay. If you really rely on reverb, because of the separation of the delay lines, it means the vocal can stay up front and not be washed out. The other thing you can do with reverbs that I sometimes do is pre-delayed reverb.
Yeah. So
you can look at what the tempo of the track is, and you know, I could look at this, you know, plug in here and go, okay, 62.5 milliseconds. I'm going to pre-delay the reverb by 62.5, which means it's in rhythm with the tempo of the track, and you get the separation of the performance coming in before the reverb. Can sound a little bit unnatural if you overdo it, but it sometimes works on some tracks, as can sending a little bit of the delays to the reverb to wash the delay lines out. Yeah. It can be quite nice.
So it's almost like you're trying the main vocal sort of attack, let's say, even though it's not really attack, but let's call it attack of that first hit. Yeah. Then the delay comes in after, and then that's when the reverb comes in as well. Yeah, it's a good idea, so it doesn't wash out the sort of the attack of the main vocal.
I've not done it on this, but I certainly sometimes do that. And you know, tricks where you're sidechain ducking the effects, delay lines usually, so that the delays stay suppressed while the vocalist is singing. Then the vocalist gets to the end of the line, stops singing, so the compressor releases and the delay lines come up. I've not done any of that, and likewise I've not done any sidechain ducking of the bass with the kick drum or anything like that.
Don't think it really needed it.
No. Again, you can just go to mixes and just throw all these techniques at it, but just I would much prefer to use them for solving a problem, right? Do I need to solve this? Is there a problem that I need to solve that I can't solve with the holy trinity of compression, EQ, and effects?
Exactly.
You know, and I think in myself and Jan's project, we've seen the same thing again and again. It's just really good use of compression. It's not all these fancy tricks. There's some great tricks in there, and you know, the videos, there's some stuff, but it's more about techniques rather than tricks, and using it to achieve a given goal or solve a challenge, not just using things for the sake of it.
Yeah. So the master chain.
The master chain, yeah.
Anything. What have you got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been using Kazrog True Iron, and this is some transformer based, just a little bit of character.
Is this kind of like the sort of bus compression on an Audient desk where you can select like iron mode and stuff? That's
exactly it.
Okay,
yeah.
right.
On the 8024, you've got that, the Audient ASP8024. It's kind of like that, and you've got these different voicings, and again, you can crush it. I'm not going too crazy on it. It's just adding a little bit of character there.
Would you say that it's like a glue?
It's a little bit of glue there, and then on the subject of glue, classic SSL G bus here. Yeah, absolutely. I've actually gone for 10 millisecond attack time here. I know other producers, you know, will go with a 1 millisecond attack time and like the snare drum to be hitting that. Usually I'll go with 2-to-1 ratio. And the reason I usually go with 2-to-1 ratio is the 2-to-1 ratio has a very soft knee, so that as signals are approaching the threshold, they're subject to a little bit of compression. But I actually went for 4-to-1 ratio there. Gone for an auto release. It's probably, let's have a see what it's hitting. It's probably 3 or 4 dB gain reduction, I would say at most.
The only way out is inside.
Not even close. It's like 1.
Yeah, 1-2 dB. Yeah. And then what I've done here is what's called elliptical EQ. And I like using this. I'm using the Brainworks BX1 here. And basically it is taking stereo information of low frequency content and summing it into mono.
Yeah.
And it's just tightening up that. Again, it's one that you need to hear at war volume to be able to appreciate the way that it slightly tightens up the lows. But if I just bypass that.
The only way out is inside.
It's pretty subtle, but
it's really, really subtle. It's kind of like going at the halfway point of the difference between a CD or a tape master versus a vinyl.
Yeah.
Because obviously everything below 150 is monoed.
Yeah.
And it's kind of doing that, and it's just like it's reinforcing the power of the mix to be more central than everywhere.
Yeah. And, there's all those psychoacoustical studies that say that we don't perceive low frequency information in stereo anyway, and that it just takes it into the center and divides that overhead requirement between the two speakers, which seems to be working. But, I've kept it at 120. Some mixes I'll go up to 155, but that seems to be working there. Got our friend Ozone here. We've just got a little bit of compression going on here. And interestingly, I've got some stereo widening here, but I've only got it from 2K upwards.
Okay.
2.5, I think. Is it? Yeah, 2.5 upwards. And I've gone for it on this. Yeah. You need to be careful with this. This adds a lot of brightness. You're going to hear a huge jump in brightness. It can sound really fake. You'd probably be quite surprised with this. This is without the stereo widening.
The only way out is inside.
Without
The only way to be.
Interesting, it's almost turned into an exciter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like an immature exciter. You need to be careful with that. I've probably
ruined mixes quite quickly.
You can ruin mixes really quite quickly. I did I mixed a project that was a band called Baron Carter.
Yeah.
And I remember using the imager pretty heavily on that, and it works well, but you just need to be careful with it. It can sound really fake, and only use it when it does work on certain mixes like it is here. And you need to be, when you do that move, you need to be careful the way that it kind of like works alongside any brightening. And you can see I've got a bit of a brightness boost, but only really up here in the air frequencies. I'm sort of like up at 8.2K.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing is where the guitars have generally rolled off around 7-8K, from that point upwards, I'm just bringing up the air frequencies. I've also got a high pass filter there as well. So there was not much going on with Ozone, like apart from compression and the imaging. And then here I've got Golfos. This is intelligent EQ. It works quite well on your master. It's a nice plugin. And then of all the limiters that I've been using, I really am liking DMG Audio Limitless. It's got different algorithms that emulate. My understanding is that it's got emulations of analog A to D conversions, like the Lavry Gold.
Yeah.
Like Jens Bogren's doing for quite years. Going from analog to digital in a converter and hitting it hard, and you get this nice soft clipping. It's kind of doing that. It's a nice. You got these different algorithms here. In this instance, I've gone with punchy. Usually I'll go with transparent, but I've gone for punchy on this mix, and it worked quite well. In some instances, if I'm hitting the limiter really hard, I'll split the load and use two different limiters doing two different things, but it's working fine on this one. What I was trying to achieve was this note definition on the guitars, getting the orchestration in there, having the bass fulfilling its role, and ending up with a production that sounds cohesive, clarity and cohesion, whilst maintaining this sense of heaviness. And to a large extent, I think I've achieved that.
I think you did, and you learnt to abandon it at the exact right time. It's always the right time.
Absolutely. John, it's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely chatting with you.
Yeah, lovely chatting with you too, mate.
Thank you.